case and asked you to review the case, and then we would discuss it in class. So I'm assuming everyone had a chance to read it. They give you about 10 minutes to just address these questions with your seatmate, and then we'll walk through it together. What kind of fraud is this? First of all, did fraud occur?
Yes.
So what type of fraud occurred? Why? What makes it misappropriation of assets? Sorry? Theft of what kind of asset?
Cash that was supposed to be received.
Right. It's theft of cash. Right? The person's stealing cash because they're stealing, right, the receivables from customers. So the fact of the matter that the fact that they are debiting, reversing the sale basically, would suggest that they're stealing cash. So what opportunity existed? Remember the four triangle: incentives, pressures, opportunities, attitudes, rationalization. What opportunity? Yes. Now, why would the new store opening? Why would a new store opening create the opportunity for fraud? What is it about a new store opening?
I guess there's certain things that happen when store first opens, so you can have an explanation as to why things would be different.
Okay, but what creates? So, what kinds of things would be different?
Well, in this case, the idea that they sold you accounting information system, that was a problem.
Okay, so but that's not unique to a new store, but that's the thing. There's a new accounting information system installed, right? That would be whether it's in a new store or not. But that's a potential factor that leads to an opportunity, right? You had your hand up. Right. In what way? What kind of? Give me an example of the control is lacking.
Like the controller was based mainly on the main store that they had. It seems like there wasn't control on the other side.
Right. So basically, what AJ is saying, there's no oversight, right? Because it's not a problem that a controller is based in another location. That's not an issue. I mean, we have multinational companies all over the world, right? And they somehow manage to do business. So it's not that you have to have somebody there. The controller is normally going to be, at headquarters or something like that. The problem is there's no oversight. How do you know there was no oversight? What tells you in the case that there was no oversight? AJ.
The fact that the manager, when she asked, the whole situation with lowering the cost, it really had a good effect on your receivables. The controller was like, wait, what do you mean lowering the cost?
Right. Because that's an explanation so that alone doesn't tell what really tells you, right? Because the controller was unaware of it. That explanation didn't make sense to him. But what that would suggest is what's more indicative of the fact that there's no oversight is the fact that the fraud was able to happen, that there were credits going through accounts receivable that didn't seem to make sense, right? So what was wrong? How did this person perpetrate the fraud? What means did they have to perpetrate the fraud? Yes.
They saw that sales was getting debited, and usually the sales generally shouldn't get debited. Because if it gets debited, then there's no the sale isn't occurring, and it's a tip off that something's happening because they even said it why is the sales going lower and why is the gross margin getting affected, and they blamed the new accounting system for it, and they accepted it for a while until they talked to the controller, and the controller was like, that problem was there.
Right. The clue should have been a debit to sales because there's no reason that you should debit sales, right? Can you think of a reason why you would debit sales? Right? Because if there's a sales return, that flows with sales returns and allowances. So contra revenue account for that, right? Sales should represent shipments to customers. Returns represent are in the contra account.
So if there was really an accounting system there
Well then, but here's the problem, right? So on the first blush, it might seem plausible that because so that would mean that you should see that the sales journal is incorrectly accumulating sales, right? That's a bigger problem, right? Because then there should be a problem with internal controls. So if you're seeing that the sales journal is, so in other words, the auditor should have followed up, right? Because normally you would not expect to see a debit to sales, and if the explanation on first blush seems to be reasonable, you still would want to follow up. So in this case, what did the auditor suffer from? Remember the judgment biases. What bias did this auditor exhibit, this staff auditor? They accepted the client's explanation, first explanation.
Okay.
Confirmatory, right? They confirmed. They looked for evidence to confirm it. They didn't look for disconfirming evidence. So they didn't consider possible alternatives. Right? You could also, okay, yes, that's a plausible explanation, but what else could it be? And then you try to look for this disconfirming evidence, right? So if it's indeed the problem with the system, that the system was incorrect, well, what is incorrect about the system? Why, is it fixed now? How did you fix it? Also, it would seem to me that if it's rolling up the wrong numbers, that you would see this happening, several times a month. Particularly, why is it just selectively choosing certain receivables and incorrectly rolling them up? So you would ask, in other words, you would ask more questions. So of course, as with any fraud, the person is going to come up with a plausible reason. Like they're not going to tell you something that's totally out of the norm that doesn't make sense. So there has to be a new system implementation, right? So that explanation is plausible. But the auditor, and this kind of gets to the question before, the auditor kind of dropped the ball in that they didn't look to disconfirm. They only looked to confirm. So poor internal controls in the form of lack of oversight, no review and reconciliation. There also, let's think about this. For the person to be able to steal cash, they had to have access to cash, right? And for them to be able to write it off, they had to have authority to update the books and records, right? To write off, access to update the accounting records, and also access to authorize transactions, because a write-off is a transaction. Right? So that's a classic segregation of duties issue, which we're going to talk about later when we talk about internal controls. Right? One person had too much authority. No person in the organization should have the ability to perpetrate a fraud by stealing or fraudulently or manipulating the financial records and cover it up. Right? So there's a classic segregation of these issues. So a real lack of internal control. Okay, we talked about the trail that was created by the fraud. What else we talked about what the staff auditor did. Was the audit senior somewhat responsible for the audit approach?
Yeah, in a way, because he basically, in the beginning, when he said that the staff accountant would have gone to Aspen and the senior went to Denver, when the staff accountant returned, he told them that everything was fine, and he basically took his word for it without further investigating, more for the fact that their budget had been cut so that they had time pressures to complete the audit. So basically he didn't do his due diligence, and because since his staff accountant is below him, he should probably make sure instead of just taking his word for it.
So do you think the senior was skeptical at all? Did the senior display any signs of skepticism? No, yes.
Only half of them.
did he go and ask those questions?
Or he's just acting maybe.
That's not skeptical, right? Skepticism would be that you, because the senior was actually, let me rephrase that. The senior was skeptical in terms of questioning the 100,000, looking at the gross profit margin percentages, but what the senior did not do was act on that skepticism. So which is worse? Not being skeptical or not acting on it? They're both, you know, your goal is to be skeptical, right? So that's bad enough, but it's even, you know, if you are skeptical and you don't act on it, that's even more telling, right? Because you're not following through, you're not taking action. So it doesn't matter that you've identified a particular problem or something that doesn't, an issue that might be present, but because if you don't act on it, you have no evidence about it, right? You haven't followed up on it. So the senior initially just, you know, it kind of came up in conversation. They didn't follow through on those issues that they had when they first reviewed it. They, in a way, kind of accepted the staff person's explanation of what happened, right? And so they didn't act on their skepticism, their initial problems with it. What else with the senior? Did it make sense? What would you have done in that situation? What do you think? You're the senior and you had to decide how to allocate your resources for the audit. Would you have done the same thing? Send the staff person out, or you go out, or what? What do you think would have been most beneficial? This gets to number 4, some of the reasons.
I think you should have went with them.
So let's just say the senior couldn't go. You have 2 locations and you have to conduct the audit in a set amount of time.
So nowadays, technology is so advanced, maybe hold some sort of like teleconference and, you know, try to go over the numbers while he's there, go over the things he's seeing, just to kind of keep him in the loop. And then, given the senior's experience, you could probably like lead them in a better direction and say, hey, we do look at this, we do look at that.
Right? AJ? Thank you, AJ. We just covered for Samsung. Talked about brainstorming. So here you have a situation where you have 2 sites, right? One is a relatively new site, so it's a new store. You haven't audited that location before. You know that the client is implemented a new accounting information system. So you can't both be at those locations. So if you probably should have had a broad brainstorming session, right? Or you know, at least talk about some of the issues that you're going to look for in a new store. Have you done analytical procedures in the planning phase? Maybe there would have been something that jumped out at the senior in terms of retention directing. They could have instructed the new person to be mindful of. Or the senior could have gone to the new location and the staff person could have, could have given the staff person instructions or accounts to work on at the headquarters, right? Because at headquarters you have more oversight for one thing, because the controller is there. So the senior could have gone out to the new location for a few days, or you know, there are any number of things, but you have to really think about, was that the most appropriate assignment to send a brand new person who had never been out on an audit to a very new location? Okay. Any other thoughts on the case? Yes.
The bottom part says it's not in the industry practice for them to sales one of these heroes, and that would be
right. That's a good point, right? So they're not, you know, it's not a retail store; they're a wholesaler. So the chances that they would be selling, offering discounts on a store-by-store, location-by-location basis is probably slim, right? So that would be a reason to question as well.
I was going to say
Mm-hmm. Oh, you're going to say the same thing? Yeah, good point, right? Because you have to look at the type of business. Right? So it's not uncommon I think, but even if you're seeing in retail stores, if you think about some of the larger retail chains, they tend to run the same kind of sales. Right? And usually, if you go in one store, and then you'll see or go to another store, they'll have the same type of sales, right? For a retail store. So it's usually there's usually some consistency. But in this case, this is a wholesale company. They have a wholesale business. It's unusual that they would be running the location like a retail, similar to a retail operation. Anything else? Okay, so this case is just a way to kind of think about how, fraudulent you have to, in evaluating, and this also stresses the importance of probably having that brainstorming session, but at a minimum looking at what's the overall environment like. So, for example, what's the tone at the top, right? What kind of environment do they operate in? So, for this particular case, you would think that the auditors would know, because they have prior history with the client, that there's probably, they would want to know what kind of oversight it is between headquarters and a new location. The fact that they open a new location in itself creates a greater level of risk, especially if there's if the oversight is not that great. So some of the things that you want to look at, right, in terms of evaluating an organization's response to reducing fraud risk is what kind of culture do you operate in. So in this case, it wasn't a situation where it would suggest that there was a heavy emphasis on creating profits, right? That wasn't what seemed to motivate this person to steal, right? Because if they were motivated to generate higher profits, they wouldn't steal the company. Instead, they would try to manipulate the numbers to look better than they really were, right? But it's what kind of tone, right? How important is internal control? What's the oversight? Is there in this case, you saw that there was not enough time or effort put in to developing for this new location a proper set of internal controls, of effective internal controls to monitor the activity at that store and monitor the personnel at that store. So some of the things you look for in terms of corporate governance is, and the culture of the organization, is that there's a strong tone at the top, that the message to employees is one that suggests that the company doesn't tolerate fraudulent behavior. They expect employees to abide by the rules, and so there's a value system and ethics created. In terms of trying to create a positive workplace and environment. And so we saw in the fraud risk triangle that one of the factors that can contribute to fraudulent behavior is the attitudes that people have, how people feel about their jobs. If they're disgruntled employees and they see an opportunity where they can, misappropriate assets, they might take advantage of that if they're disgruntled, if they believe that the company is not doing right by them. Right? So they don't really care. What companies try to do is get their employees to align themselves with the company. They feel like this is not only a place that you work, right? This is a place that we all have a shared goal, a shared vision. So you want to, if you look at what kinds of messages the company is sending out to their employees. Hire and promote appropriate employees, so the people who have the skill set necessary to do the job, is able to do the job. Training goes without explanation, and then have a code of conduct. Right? And you'll see there's code of ethics, code of conduct, have a whistleblower hotline that goes directly to perhaps someone in legal or someone on the board level, right? So that it's not someone not a part of management. But the importance is to communicate what the company's expectations are regarding ethics. In terms of the fraud, management also has a responsibility to evaluate the risk of fraud. So keep in mind when we talked about fraud last week, auditors don't conduct a fraud audit. The purpose of the audit, the objective of the audit is to provide an opinion on the financial statements and an opinion on the effectiveness of internal controls over financial reporting. So the auditor's responsibility is not to find fraud, but instead to assess the risk of fraud and identify where in the financial statements there's a high susceptibility to fraud, and then respond to that in terms of their audit procedures. It is management's responsibility to develop a system of controls and an environment such that they manage the risk of fraud. So you expect management to have an effective system of internal controls, for example, which we didn't see in the Rocky Mountain case. Right, so management is responsible to think through, well, where are there areas in our organization where there's a high risk of fraud? So for example, let's just say management knows that they pay employees, they have a system where they pay their salespeople on commission, and that they know that their salespeople are extremely competitive. And management, the more you sell, the more money you make. So you would expect to see that they would have appropriate controls in place to address that fraud risk, right? To address the risk that salespeople might try to push product out to customers just to increase their commissions. And they should have controls in place to monitor that. Monitor on a salesperson level, regional level, product level, the sales volume to see if it makes sense. Have controls in place to manage write-offs. Returns. And then obviously audit committee oversight, because audit committees are responsible for the financial reporting and auditing and oversight of the auditing process. And so an audit committee said that they're members of the board of directors, so that committee kind of, also have a responsibility as members of the board of directors to shareholders of the organization. Any questions before we go on to internal controls? fraud risk assessment a bit more as we go through internal controls, and so you can see how important internal control activities are in helping to mitigate the risk of fraud. All right, so internal controls and risk assessment. So auditors are responsible for assessing the risk that the client's system of internal controls will not prevent or detect on a timely basis material misstatements entering the accounting information system. And so, why is it important for auditors to assess control risk? We talked about it last week. So the lower the risk, the lower your control risk, that also lowers the risk of material misstatement, because control risk alone does not determine your substantive tax rate. It's the risk of material misstatement. Control risk is a key component of the audit risk model, and it's a key component of the risk of material misstatement. So auditors also have to provide an opinion on the client's effectiveness of internal control for publicly held companies only. They issue a report on internal controls over financial reporting. So that means that auditors have to test internal controls. They have to gather evidence about whether or not the controls are operating effectively. The important thing to recognize with internal controls is that it's a process, right? So there is no single correct answer. It's a judgment. auditor's judgment about the effectiveness of that control. And remember, auditors have no input into internal controls. Internal controls are management's responsibility. So auditors are only assessing the effectiveness of internal controls in terms of issuing the audit report on controls, as well as assessing that the effectiveness to determine the risk of material mistake. So as I pointed out, internal controls is a management process. It's management's responsibility. It involves people in the organization. And so the organization is looking to provide reasonable controls related to safeguarding of assets, cash, inventory, information, ensuring that the financial statements are reliable, promoting operational efficiency, and then encouraging compliance with management's directives. Of these four, which are most important to the audit process, the external audit process? Yes. Right. What else? Right. So the first two, right? Safeguarding of assets, right? Because assets are reported in the financial statements. One of the things you have to consider is that the assets actually exist. Remember one of the assertions? That those assets actually exist. So the auditor is considering what kind of control do the client have over safeguarding of assets and thus ensuring the reliability of the financial statements. The last two, operational efficiency and directives with management or compliance with management's directives, are more internal to management. Right? The auditor is not going to issue an opinion on whether or not it promotes operational efficiency. They're not looking at that. Because a control might be inefficient and still be effective for the goals of, or objectives of financial statements, right? The information reported in the financial statement. So the auditor might provide the client with some feedback on the efficiency. They might say, you know, this control is not very efficient, you could probably do X, Y, Z, and get the same result. Or you have compensating controls that reach the same result. But they're not going to give them a negative opinion, an adverse opinion, because the controls aren't operating efficiently. They give an opinion on the effectiveness of the control. So these last two bullets are really related to management's directives. So you could understand why management would want the controls to be efficient as well as effective, right? Because the instituting controls, implementing internal controls are expensive. And that's why it's important for management to understand where their risks are so that they can develop controls to address those most significant risks. I already talked about the fact that management is responsible for controls. Again, it's reasonable but not absolute. And management is also going to issue a report on internal controls. In addition to auditors, managers also have to attest to the effectiveness that they have internal controls and that they're operating effectively. This is for publicly held companies. There's some, the one major inherent limitation in internal controls is the fact that people can collude. You can have the best internal control system around. But if two or more people get together and decide that they're going to override the control, it's very difficult to detect. So that in the Rocky Mount example, where the person was stealing cash by writing off receivables, if that person was working with somebody else, right? And let's say they didn't, debit the sales or anything like that. They just, when the cash came in, they took the cash, and then they just, and then somebody else working with them credited accounts receivable and debited the allowance for doubtful accounts or bad debt expense. Debit bad debt expense, credit accounts receivable. That would be harder to detect, right? Because there's a control, they have controls in place where the person who has access to the cash doesn't have the ability to update the financial records, right? So that would be two people colluding. It would be harder to determine that because of collusion. Auditors have to, as I said, issue a report on internal controls over financial reporting. The objective of that report is relates to the reliability of the financial reporting process, concerns about fraudulent financial reporting, misappropriation of assets, so that controls are in place to identify to detect or prevent on a timely basis fraudulent financial reporting or misappropriation of assets or any illegal acts, and that controls are in place to safeguard assets. So auditors generally, and we'll cover this as we go through the different cycles, but they look at controls around the business cycles and classes of transactions. And so business cycle being sales and collection cycle, or expenditure, acquisition and expenditure cycle. So the controls are going to be based on those different cycles. Obviously, there are different objectives. Also think about the fact that even though the assertions don't change for those, they're the same regardless of what cycle we're talking about, the documentation or the evidence that auditors have to gather to satisfy those assertions are different based on the transactions, right, or based on the business cycle that we're looking at. And likewise, the controls are going to be different because the information that's generated is different. So we have a framework for internal controls, and that's the COSO framework. And the COSO framework is widely followed by many organizations, and so you generally see most companies adhere to the COSO framework in terms of developing what they consider an effective system of internal controls. And the COSO framework was modified, or enhanced, I should say, maybe about a year or two ago. The book hasn't updated for it, but overall the COSO framework gives more emphasis on, for example, risk assessment. But the basic framework has stayed the same in terms of the components of the internal controls. So there are 5 components, and let's go through what we mean by the control environment, which I talked about before. The control environment really gets to the tone at the top. What kind of corporate governance exists? What's the company's commitment to internal controls? What kind of policies do they have? What's their philosophy about internal controls? How effective is the audit committee and the board of directors? So that really, so when an auditor, and again, a lot of this information, the auditor is going to gather when they are in the planning stage of the audit, right? When they're looking at going through the client acceptance and continuance decision. They get information about that. So again, these are things, this is the message that the company sends to their employees. How much do they value internal controls? The risk assessment process that I'm talking about here is the risk assessment process that the company goes through, not what the auditor goes through. For an organization to be able to identify effective internal controls or where controls are needed, they have to appropriately assess the risk. You have to know where you have risk, right? You have to know where the problems can happen, right? Where you're susceptible to fraud, to be able to develop the appropriate procedures, right? So the risk assessment process that management goes through is designed for the company to ensure that they have procedures in place to address the risk. Right? And they have to recognize where that risk is coming from, what gives rise to the risk, what, given the transactions they engage in, what kinds of risk are they susceptible to. And in designing and responding to respect to their control procedures, they have to identify those factors that increase risk. So an example I used was if you're in the sales cycle and you pay on commission, right? You have a greater risk that you want to respond to with respect to incentives by employees to overstate sales or overstate the amount of sales that they make to employees. And then, given that risk that you identify, estimate the significance of the risk. How significant is it? And the importance here is, if it's not a significant risk, then you're not going to develop some elaborate control to contain it. Right? It's not worth it because there's a cost to implementing internal controls. So you want, again, the client wants to focus on those significant risks and assess the likelihood of the risk occurring. How likely is it to happen? If it's highly unlikely, again, you're not going to develop these elaborate controls or expensive controls. And then your response to that is the control activity that you develop that's necessary to manage that risk. Okay, so it's not, when I talk about in the COSO framework, when we're talking about risk assessment, it's not the audit risk model. It's the client's, the auditor evaluates the client's process for assessing that risk. The third component would be the actual control activity. So the control environment, the risk assessment process is all the factors that you consider, that should be considered in developing your control activity. So management's home at the top, how they view the importance of internal controls is going to have a direct impact on the types of control activities that they put in place. Same thing, obviously, as I just described, the risk assessment process is going to have a direct relationship with the types of control activities they put in place. The control activities fall into 5 key areas. Not that there are 5 control activities, there are 5 key areas. And there could be different types of control activities to address each of these areas. So we talked about, we saw in the Rocky Mountain case, that there wasn't an adequate segregation of duties. And because there wasn't an adequate segregation of duties, the store manager was able to commit a fraud. And it went undetected. And quite frankly, it might have gone undetected for a long time because there was no oversight and there was a lack of segregation of duties. So the importance of segregation of duties is you don't want to put one person in the position of being able to commit a fraud or make an error and cover it up. Another key control is proper authorization of transactions and activities. Right? So again, if you go back to the Rocky Mountain case, this manager was able to write off a receivable, basically, by reversing it. That's when you reverse it, right? You're basically saying that the receivable didn't happen. It was a mistake. So any reversal of journal entry, so at a minimum, if, let's just say that the system was incorrectly reporting sales and receivables, there should have been an authorization or review of that journal entry before that journal entry was allowed to be posted to the general ledger. Granting of credit is authorized before shipment takes place. Is an example of authorizing a transaction or an activity before it takes place. Right? So you could imagine you don't want the salesperson to authorize credit, right? Why not? What's the harm? I'm a salesperson. I get a new customer, and I'm going to authorize credit.
Because as a salesperson, you want sales to increase, so
you're biased, right? You have an incentive. Remember on the floor triangle, you have an incentive. So I'm trying to make my numbers look really good because I want to be salesperson of the year. I want a big commission. I want a big trip, to Europe, whatever. So I might have incentives to boost the numbers so that I get the personal incentives. So if I have that incentive, I don't care if I sell to customers who don't pay. somebody independent of selling, of going out and selling, reviewing and approving credit, because that's your checks and balance, right? That person's incentive, their concern is that sales be made to customers who are able to pay. They care about the collection of that receipt. The other control activities, adequate documents and records. Things you'll see such as pre-numbered documents and documents prepared at the time of the transaction. So, and this is really important from an audit perspective, right? Because a lot of the documentation that we use in our evidence gathering phase, are documents that the client generates, right? So think about how we report sales in an environment with a customer, we ship goods to a customer, right? We're using the shipment of those goods as the trigger to report the revenue. So we have to have really good controls around shipping documents. Physical control over assets and records. You see these things with passwords, but also you want to see checks a lot. Also, you want to see that there's limited access to terminals, for example. Right? If you're in if you're in distribution, right, you shouldn't have the ability to update the accounting. Right? You shouldn't have access to go to a terminal and disperse cash if you're in distribution, because your responsibility is in the distribution center. You should be able to authorize a payment. So again, you want to make sure that if you do a walkthrough and you go through a warehouse, that you see the terminals. Of course, the terminals are going to be out there, but that I could just walk up to that terminal and voila, I have access to all of the information in the distribution center. And so you want to see that there are controls over access to information, and you usually see that in password. Also, the other important aspect of that is accountability. Right? If you control access, you're controlling access. You also enforce accountability. Because if I can't get it, if somebody gets into that system under my password, then I'm accountable. So you're not supposed to have a password. And then independent checks on performance. So you see things like reconciliations, reviewing schedules that someone prepares, and we saw that again with that case where if you saw that receivables were being written off or journal entry, there was a reversing journal entry to sales, something like that should have been reviewed, or at least if there was a review of activity, unusual activity in the sales journal. It's not normal. So those are the 5 key areas of control activities that you expect to see. Segregation of duties. The 4 things that we look for in terms of segregation of duties is that a person who has access to assets, cash, inventory is not the same person who also accounts for those assets. They don't have the ability to update the accounting records. Authorization of transactions is separate from the custody of assets. So in other words, you shouldn't have access to inventory, right? And then be able to write off accounts receivable. So let's say you ship something to a customer, you have access to inventory, and then you have the ability to write off accounts receivable because you can really ship the goods to your fake warehouse, right? And then write it off so it doesn't happen. Operational responsibility from record-keeping responsibility, and then IT duties from the user department. So we'll talk about this a bit more when we cover information technology, IT control. So let's take, so I'm actually going to go with Paul, but I'm going to take stop here. We'll finish this on Thursday.